We're going to go into our scripture reading now. And you can follow along in the bulletin, or you can look in your Bibles. And we're going to read from John 1 to 18. So, and this is on page 4 of your bulletin. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testified concerning me. He cried out, saying, "This is the one I spoke about when I said, 'He who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me.' Out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Lord Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who in himself, God, and in his closest relationship with the Father, has made him known." And the verse we're going to focus on today is verse 14. And the version of the Message, if you flip around on your, if you look at page 5 of your bulletin, the Message version says, verse 14, "The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood." Thank you.
I'm Nelson, lead pastor, and I'm really glad to see you all. And I look out and I see covenant partners and regular attenders of Community West. I see friends, new friends, and old friends, some who have been partners of this mission along the way from Third Church, and also family members. And it just is really heartening to be here. The elements are kind of inhospitable. Somebody texted me, a neighbor across the street texted me this morning because he's out of town and he wants me to get his mail. And he said, "I hope the rain doesn't rain on your parade." And I said, "There is no way that our parade is going to be rained on today." It's a great day to be here, and it's a great day to be here with all of you. Thank you for being here. And today is our capital campaign kickoff, which we're calling Moving into the Neighborhood. And it would be easy to assume that what we're talking about is that we are moving into this neighborhood. But that's not where moving into the neighborhood begins. See, what we're going to learn today is that moving into the neighborhood begins with Jesus. And we're invited to receive him and call on his name today. So John chapter 1 begins, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." So John is talking about Jesus, but he refers to him only as the Word, and in the Greek, it's the Logos. So why does John do this? So literally, John is saying, in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. So why would John do this? Well, I think the answer is that John is first and foremost an evangelist. And the Logos is a term that connects with every culture in John's day. For example, the Greeks had a conception of the Logos, and the Jews had a conception of the Logos. And they weren't the same, but the conceptions basically revolved around divine reason, that the Logos was the rational principle that kept the world from flying apart into chaos. So John knows that the Logos strikes a deep chord in his day with every culture. Not that John means everything that culture means by the Logos, the fact is that John will go way beyond what anyone in his day meant by Logos. The point is that John takes culture seriously. And he knows that the gospel is not a Lego piece that we force in the same way to fit every setting. And so he's capitalizing on existing cultural connections to explain Jesus to the world. So John says, in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. And then he says in verse 14, and the Word, the Logos, became flesh. And the staggering thing, John says, is that the Logos is not some impersonal principle by which the universe is ordered, but the Logos has become a person. The Logos became flesh. The sense of it is that the Word entered entirely into human experience. And this is the mystery of the incarnation. That God has become man, that the infinite has become finite, that Spirit has become a person, a flesh and blood person. And Dale Bruner says the visual picture here is of an immense V coming down and becoming a minute measurable point, piercing into our tiny time. The Logos is God's great condescension from heaven to earth. And then John goes on and says, and the Word made his dwelling among us. And the Message version, as Andre read, says the Logos, the Word moved into the neighborhood. Now, Dale Bruner says, this is not a paraphrase. The rendering captures the sense of the Greek perfectly. The consonants of the Greek word for made his dwelling are those of the Hebrew word Shekinah, which was used to describe God's presence with the Israelites in the Old Testament. The tent of meeting was where God dwelt with his people and where his glory was seen. Exodus 40, 34 to 38. So the writer of Exodus says God pitched his tent with the Israelites in the Sinai desert. And now, years later, John announces God is pitching his tent with all humanity in Palestine. God is moving into the neighborhood, this time all into planet Earth. And I think there's a great deal of mystery about the incarnation, and I don't really understand it. But what's clear from John's teaching is the divine intention to be present. I just want you to think of that word, to be present. See, in most religions, the holiest people are those who are most separated from culture and sinners. They live as monks or nuns in remote areas away from average people. But by contrast, Jesus came into the mess of human history. He came into our fear and anxiety. He came into our circumstances. And every indication in Scripture is that this move was costly. Now, I know everybody here isn't fully bought in to Christianity. We hope to be a place for everybody to come and take up your journey to God. But Christians believe the Son is the divine expression of the self-giving love of the Father. But when we say that, we mean the cross. Have you ever reflected on how costly the incarnation is? How costly presence is? Now, many of us can remember today people who came to our birthday parties and graduations long ago. I have my Uncle Nathan in view. He came to my graduation from college. I have my godparents, Joe and Margaret Nelson, in mind. They came to my graduation from high school. Many of you have the picture of people in mind who made a costly commitment to come be with you. Maybe they drove a long way, but they came to be with you at an important event. So think about it. It's really costly to commit to one place. Many of you sacrificed to be here today. You had to jiggle your schedules. You had to say no to something else. To be one place, you have to close down every other place. You've have to close down all other options. And that's why presence is such a powerful expression of love. There's so much sacrifice in presence. I think of marriage this way. You know, when you marry, in your vows, you say this little phrase, to forsake all others. And I think that presence has a forsaking all others quality, because presence always involves commitment to one place. And so necessarily you close down all other places. You forsake all others. Do you see how presence is so costly? So here's the point. The first great act of the self-giving love of the Father was not the cross, it was the incarnation. It was when Jesus moved into the neighborhood. And I picture, if I'd overheard the conversation in heaven between the Father and the Son about their vision for salvation, I might have said, guys, can't you do it differently? Why not just send a battalion of angels to beat back sin and evil? Why not just send a whirlwind of your power? Jesus, you can hang back here. But you can imagine, you know, maybe with a tear in the eye, the Father and the Son and the exchange, and the Father says, no, you have to go. There's no other way but for you to go. And another costly thing about presence is it's a strategy that's slow. You know, God's vision for salvation was this. Jesus slipped into the world in a feed trough in Bethlehem. His disciples didn't understand his mission. The religious people in his day resisted him. And when he died, everybody thought his mission was a failure. And yet, Jesus stayed in there. Yesterday afternoon, Lisa and I went to a party in our neighborhood of a 1-year-old boy who's having his birthday. And it was really, really cute. He took the cake. I don't know if I've ever seen this, but the cake came and he grabbed it. And he just sunk his fingers in. And then it reminded me of when the groom feeds the bride at a wedding. Sometimes, you know, he'll like mash it. Well, he just took the icing. And then I learned he'd never had a birthday cake before. Well, I guess it's only one. He'd never had a cake before. But he just took it, and then he cried when it was gone. But we went to this neighborhood party. It was like four doors up, and we stayed a couple of hours, and I enjoyed talking to the people, couples and families we've now seen over and over again in our neighborhood. And I sense a deepening relationship with these people. I'm growing to love them. But it's also so dang slow to build a relationship and to be present there. It's such a slow bake. That's the way relationship is. And I'd love it to be quicker, that we get to know each other more deeply and more meaningful things cross that bridge of friendship. And I think one of us would have interjected into the conversation between the Father and the Son, can't you make salvation bigger? Can't you just do this thing with more clout? I think one of us would have said that. Can't you make it quicker? God, why do you repeatedly choose the power of presence? And one of the questions I ask myself here at Community West from time to time is, do we have a vision worth following? And I think that that's a question that you ought to ask yourself about our vision. And you ought to ask yourself about your vision for your life. Do we have a vision worth following here at Community West? Because our vision is a community vision. We believe the church exists for the sake of the community it serves. We don't have a church vision. We have a community vision. We want to make West Richmond a better place. And so moving into the neighborhood is not just doing it here. We're not moving into this neighborhood only. We see a facility as a home base for worship and equipping so you can be equipped to move into your neighborhoods wherever you live and work. So when I ask the question, do we have a vision worth following? My answer is yes. It's pretty quickly yes. I feel very solid about that answer. And you know why? It's not because we've read the latest books, we've jumped on the latest fad, we're so smart. I think the reason why it's solid is that our vision is Jesus' vision. Our vision is not our vision. We're just trying to join in on Jesus' vision. So just before Jesus ascended to heaven, he said, I came, now I'm leaving. And then he turned to his followers and he said, but I'm going to send my Spirit to live in you. Now you go be me. You go be me in your neighborhoods and workplaces. And as you go be me, I'll be with you. You see how that works? That's so solid. That's been the vision ever since he came. That's been the vision for the church. And you know what's great about this vision? That means you and I, if we enter in, get to live a life of significance. Do you want a life of significance? Right? Yeah, let's do something. Go ahead and raise your hand. You want a life of significance? I do. I think about that too. And sooner or later, you'll get to the point where I've gotten, and that is you will conclude that nobody gets a life of significance by focusing on you. That's not a Christian thing, that's just a human thing. Sooner or later, we all find out you don't get a significant life by investing in your comfort, your ambitions, your whatever. Now, I felt this in recent weeks as our nation was saying goodbye to Aretha Franklin and John McCain. So Aretha Franklin, with her, most of the news reports centered around her song Respect, right? What you want, baby, I got R-E-S-P-E-C-T. What I want is something me, R-E-S-P-E-C-T. It's a great song. That song's going to be even greater. So in the end, Aretha Franklin's legacy was not about her voice or her talent. Her legacy was about respect for her people. And I saw the same thing in John McCain in grieving his death, because when John McCain, most of the news reports about him focused on him being a bridge builder in politics. And so at his funeral, he had former presidents from both the Republican and Democratic parties speak. And in the end, I see that John McCain's legacy was bigger than his rise to power for the sake of his preferences in his party. And the newscasters got this. The reason we all entered in to John McCain's death is that his legacy was about the prosperity of a nation. His legacy, at the end of the day, was about everybody. And I think the same was with Aretha Franklin, that we were grieving their passing, but vicariously, by remembering them, we got to be part of something bigger than us. Because the news reports captured how their lives were bigger than themselves. So in closing, and I'll invite the band to come up, where it begins today is with Jesus. He's the one who moved into the neighborhood 2,000 years ago, and who is here with us and in us today. So how does John want us to respond? We find this in verse 12. John writes, "Yet to those who received him, to those who," and some versions say, "called on his name, he gave the right to become children of God." So what is John saying here? He's saying that Jesus moved into the neighborhood, and the point was access, and the point was a new special relationship that humanity could have with God. By the miracle of God becoming flesh, Jesus bound himself to us, and by receiving him, we bind ourselves to him. And John invites us to call on his name. And normally we only understand that that's Jesus, and the name Jesus means God saves. But John is calling us also to call on the name Emmanuel, which means God with us. And finally, when he comes again, to call on Christ the King. So friends, ultimately, today is the day of a public launch for a capital campaign, but ultimately today is about worship. And this is in the bottom bar of your worship guide, but in the 6th century BC, the prophet Zechariah wrote this, long before Jesus came. He said, "Shout and be glad, daughter Zion, for I am coming, and I will live among you, declares the Lord." He's saying, I, the sovereign Lord, am coming to move into the neighborhood. will you respond in worship as the band leads? And after a few moments, we'll receive our morning offering. Let's continue to worship God. And so now, finally, friends, so just thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing this moment with us, what we believe is an historic moment. And we want to finish the service in what we think is going to make a memory for our congregation. And I think it's going to be a special treat. So up on the gravel parking lot, and you know, I didn't say one more thing. I am so inspired with all of you. I'm so inspired by the Tri-Chair team. I'm so inspired by people who've made the videos and done the websites and put this day on together, and the lunch and the service. This is an all hands on deck church, and it's a all hands on deck day, and that's what's beautiful about our church. But I'd love for you to follow me in just a moment, and we're going to culminate the service up on the gravel parking lot. So you hear some pitter patter. So grab an umbrella or get under somebody else's umbrella. Take your stuff, okay? Don't go yet, but take your stuff with you, because this area is going to be transformed to where we have lunch when we finish the service and come back. We are going to go up to where our, God willing, future worship facility is going to be, and we're going to stand in that space, and we're going to close our service right there as an emblem of the future, and we're going to worship God there. So I'm going to lead, and grab your umbrella, and I'm just going to invite you to come on up with me, and we're going to have a very short service, closing the service under the umbrella up there. So will you follow me?
I think we're mostly here thanks to our volunteers that outlined, and we don't know that it's perfectly to scale. It is. It might be. It yep. No surprise there. Very close. So, honest confession, our capital campaign that we are launching today is not safe. What I mean by that is, capital campaign consultants tell you that if you raise 3 times your operating budget, then you've had a very successful campaign. If you raise 5 times, it's wildly successful, and we're trying to raise 8 times. I've been part of capital campaigns that are safe. This one is not safe. And the reason that I am willing to be a part of it is some of the deep themes that I think we've been focusing on in recent weeks that relate to the glory of God. You know, the way that we've master planned the land is front to back, urban to rural. The village green is over in this direction, and we're devoted to prayer and retreat in the back. And right at the center, we really want the facility to be under the glory of God. And what that means is we love the idea of tall ceilings and a lot of glass, and we love the ideas of these tall trees that are like steeples that point to something beyond ourselves. And we love the idea in the suburbs of saying to people that are very, very self-sufficient, when life brings you to your knees, there is a God, and you can be part of that story. You can be part of something bigger than yourself. I think it can be good news and quite a relief to people who feel all around us that they have to sort of manage life on their own. And so this facility, we think architecturally, we want there to be sort of vertical spaces, almost like a modern day cathedral. You know, when you go into cathedrals in Europe, you find people lower their voice into hushed tones because they sense by just looking at the architecture that they're they're in a transcendent space. They're amidst glory. And so we're not envisioning a First Facility as, oh my gosh, Jeff Bushman is here. Our architect is here from Charlottesville. I didn't think you were coming, so here you go, Jeff. We've told Jeff and his team we want beauty and we want transcendence. And we want people to walk into this space and feel not sort of the the horizontal conversation, because there will be places for the horizontal conversation in the building. But in this space, we want the vertical to be preeminent. And we want people to know that there is a God and that we come here to worship God in Jesus Christ. And so for us, that's powerful and that's central. And several weeks ago, I preached on Gideon, and the punchline in the Gideon story, remember the Gideon, God rigged things, he whittled down the men to 300 men. What was the punchline? So that there would be no mistaking who gets the glory. And so listen, in this unsafe capital campaign, if we, see, here's the thing. A lot of how you know the glory of God is through surprise. If I'd been part of Gideon's army and there were 300 of me and I went up against 135,000 Midianites and I won, I would be surprised. Listen, so, full disclosure, in the natural, I'm going to be surprised if we meet our capital campaign goal. You'd be a kook not to be. We're trying to reach 8 times our operating budget. But here's the thing. The reason I love it, can you tell I'm kind of thrilled to be kind of in this space? The reason I love it is this is the adventure of the life of faith where the end game is there will be no mistaking who gets the glory. And so the capital campaign, but particularly this space, is unto the glory of God. And let it be a testament that everything else in our lives, we should be surprised constantly because everything is from the hand of God and is unto the glory of God.